So, so obviously, defence has got a lot of projects, a lot of documents, a lot of things in place to try and manage the complexity around and trying to design a defence force. And we were thinking, yeah, thanks. Next one. So we were thinking, can systems thinking help this? We're nearly here. Okay. So, can systems thinking help us improve this process? How can we do that? So, we go right back to, I think, the mid-60s as well. This is similar to the talk earlier about Conway's law. He was a software engineer in the early days of software engineering and had a law. It was more of a conjecture than a law, but it's still kind of useful for this context. So organisations which design systems, in the broad sense here, are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organisations. So if you've got two systems that are out in field being used, for better or worse, their communication systems more or less mimic the communication structure in place in the organisation that designed it. That's where they're going with Conway's law there. So how does this help us here? So our approach is to almost reverse this. We focus on the force design and what are the organisation structure and the communication structures and the dependencies that we have between these system elements that are out there. Essentially the force design that's required. And by doing that, we can then backcast Conway's law onto the organisation to say, here are the communication structures you need in the organisation in order to get the communication structure we need in our force design. So that's the basis of where our work's coming from. Sometimes managing projects is a little bit like this in defence. You've got a lot of cats running around being trying to herded by a program manager or a program sponsor. But what if it was more like this? A flock of birds moving around the space, almost in harmony. Or better yet, perhaps more designed, a flock of birds like this here on the right. The cats, on one hand, are quite independent, very hard to herd. But yeah, again, birds, on the other hand, are natural. They self-organise and exhibit flocking behaviour. Scientists have deduced that they use three basic rules for flocking like this. Don't get too close to your neighbours, don't get too far away from them either, and head in roughly the same direction. So these local rules help regulate the overall system behaviour. Again, flocking birds have a relatively simple objective to stay together and move at roughly the same speed, whereas the force design has a more complicated objective, to create a force that is functionally coherent and effective. So in order to do this, we believe that we need to apply rules that reflect the functional aspects of the force design. So we've developed this approach that we think is the simplest set of service exchanges, I guess. And if defence is going to move to a modelling approach and away from the paper base, we think this is the simplest you can get. If you can't achieve this level of simplicity, I guess, you might as well move back to the paper-based processes that we've been using. We're basing it on the Schmoll framework, which I'll talk about in shortly. And it does incorporate these local rules to regulate the overall system behaviour. By doing this, we're hoping that the defence organisation that designs the force can then mimic this kind of flocking behaviour. Our approach is based on the service exchange, where we've got a provider and a consumer, and a services exchange between them. There's a pull side and a push side to this relationship. The provider says they provide this service exchange to this consumer, and the consumer also says we require this service from this provider. Just a quick metaphor based on my boss's favourite example there. This is Maggie from The Walking Dead, and breaking these services down, we've got the see and the think and the act, roughly aligning to the OODA loop, the orient, decide and act. Then we've got the talk aspect, the mobility, the walk, the transport, aspect, as well as the live. Um, Maggie doesn't actually have to eat all the time to be able to do these other things, but at least as long as she's eaten earlier in the day, she can perform these functions, and she'll probably have to eat later on in the day as well. But it's this live aspect, this logistics, supply and support that enables all of the other functions to be able to operate. So the SMILE framework here is broken up into 6 services, service exchanges. We think this is the minimalist set. We have explored breaking these down even further to end up with 8, 10, 11, 12, but we think it still boils down, this is the minimum set that we need to categorise the relationship between a service provider and a service consumer. So how are we applying the SMILE approach to force design management at the moment? I'll take a short example here. I'll cut our force design just down to 5 elements here for simplicity and focusing on just on the sensing service. Taking the project manager for V, what they do is they're looking at what services they provide across. In the top matrix up there, you're looking at V providing a sensing service to the others, and down in the column in the bottom there, you're looking at what sensing service V is consuming from the other providers. This leaves us, so the first step, I guess, is to identify which services, which other systems you are consuming and providing to and from. And then adding a criticality. So we've broken our criticality down into 3. So level 3 is essential, 2 is important, and 1 is desirable. Whereas 0 or blank, there's no service exchange required. So again, V in the first instance goes and says, I'm providing a sensing service of critical, essential importance to W and X, whereas I'm consuming a sensing service from W and X and Z. So they fill out their row and their column in that way. So if all project managers do this, or owners of systems do this, we get 2 matrices like this, where they've all filled in what they expect to provide in the top and what they expect to consume in the bottom. Here's an example where they agree that there is no service exchange between the 2. Here also they agree that there is a service exchanged, and they also agree to the criticality level of that service. They both agree that there is a service exchange between the 2. However, they disagree on the criticality level of that service. Here, the provider recognises the service, that there's a need for this service here, but the consumer says, oh, I don't need this service. Maybe they've forgotten to add it because they're checking each other's homework, basically. But if they realise, they get together and they talk and they realise X doesn't actually have to provide this service anymore, so they might as well cut it. They can reduce their scope, they can perhaps save some money by not providing this sensing service as they expected to V. On the other hand, though, if the consumer is expecting to consume a sensing service of high criticality, but the provider is not expecting to provide it, then there's also an issue. In this case, a Z requires a sensing service, but is not being delivered by W. So these 2 project managers need to get together to talk to see whether they're actually providing this service or not. And either money needs to be transferred in, or maybe the scope or expectations for Z need to be managed. So we can end up with a matrix like this, where we've got green shows the agreements. Yellow, there's general agreement, but some criticality disagreements there. And as well as red, which says that there's quite a major problem there that you need to talk through. The next round is to try and resolve the consistency. So up until now, the project managers have been doing this on their own, filling out their own row and their own column, and this is where we can bring in this data now. We've already got some of this data captured. so that the project managers can identify their nearest neighbours, so they know who they're exchanging with and who thinks they're exchanging services with, and can go and talk to them. Work out what the problem is and try and solve that. If there's still a disagreement after some conflict resolution by the project managers, it can be pushed up to the program level, so that the program manager can then either transfer money in to make it happen, or manage expectations, or even if there's still a disagreement, even raise that issue even higher. Ultimately, we're looking for a table like this, or a matrix like this, where there's all agreements. They either agree there's a service exchanged, or they agree there's no service exchanged. But again, senior defence decision makers can come in over the top and say, no, thou shalt have this dependency because we need this in some other instance. Or no, we can't afford that. We're going to chop that back. We're going to chop back those couple of number ones in there because we don't think that's relevant, it's too expensive. That's up to them. But at least they know this and can make an informed decision. So as I said, we are currently applying this approach based on 6 pilot programs or sub-programs in defence. Currently we're touching on about 35 projects or systems or system managers. Hopefully for the rest of the year this project goes well and we can get endorsement to roll this out across the other programs and projects within defence. And hopefully we are actually making use of Conway's law. By focusing on that force design and the communication structures within the force design, we're forcing the project managers to look at their nearest neighbours, talk to them, and basically mimic that sort of flocking behaviour that we expect. And that then in turn has that flocking behaviour that we expect, the good communication structures on the force design when it's delivered. Just some indicative data. I wouldn't read too much into it. These are basically the 30-odd systems that we've started applying it to. They haven't gone through any conflict resolution processes at this stage, but there is some general agreement there, as well as some blaring mistakes and things, and that's just for sensing, I think, as well. So some of these systems down the bottom, they're quite sparse. They might not have any impact on sensing. Just thank you to the team members, some of which are here today. Thanks to our defence client in terms of joint integration concepts and assurance. They've really helped adopt and take aboard this approach and help us to roll this out across defence. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one. I see a lot of value in this. Is there any requirement to make this part of the document's requirements? Like go through that matrix out, prove that we have these discussions rather than programs or projects where there's these code dependencies, and some of these dependencies can be on other parts of government and some on other departments. Is there any way to type that in?
Certainly as part of the document suite, they're trying to go away from documents. And it's not mandatory, even the integration aspects, the documents that need to go to committees, I don't think are mandatory as such. But certainly the ones that have included it so far are like even just a small matrix of showing red and green and yellow that have actually considered their integration issues and say, here it kind of is. They've actually had quite an easy time getting through committee because they've at least thought about it, they've identified it, and it's quite well managed. We haven't gone beyond defence at the moment. We're just sticking to defence projects and things. Yep. Certainly, yes. We're sitting on the same level of the same building, I think, as contestability. We're reading them into this all the time. And certainly, I think they see value in this and have attended some of our training. We're doing training on this if you're interested to know more. Wednesday afternoons, 4 to 5 o'clock. And certainly we've had some contestability, some CASG, some CIG people attend this to get a feel for it because they're quite interested in this approach.
It tends to be, it looks like it's more of a kind of a check block exercise. Is there anything else that's behind it? I have done this in the past and it hasn't been of much value.
Sure. Currently they're developing a real tool to capture this. At the moment it's just in spreadsheets. We do have a project management space on the system, and this will become part of that. They're developing a module for that at the moment. And certainly if you start to drag projects to the right, if they're slipping, it won't just slip in the cost or the schedule, it'll actually drag these dependencies with it. And so you can see not only the impact on the project itself, but all its nearest neighbours. And so they'll get a notification that this project that they rely on, it's rated essential potentially, is changing. And does that impact on them? So they'll get a notification when they log into the system to say, hey, this project's moving. Are you okay with this? So it's tying in that aspect into the management system that's there.
No, more along the lines of, as the data itself you're collecting of the proper values, the understanding there. I have gone through this in the past, and I think a lot of the information tends to be poor or wrong because there's the level of understanding what's trying to be done is not well understood.
Certainly we've had data quality problems already that we've identified. They're reasonably, from a trained eye, we can identify those quite easily. When you see perhaps a missile being a provider of information mobility, yes, it requires information to be able to perhaps to go and hit a target, but it doesn't actually provide that service to anyone else. So we can certainly do a lot of data checking there. And I think training is a big part of this, to try and ramp up training so that they understand. And it's not going to happen overnight. We expect to roll this out over time so we can get people to understand this. But again, sorry, we think this is the minimalist set of functions that you need to be able to capture to go to a model-based system. You can certainly go further, and we've been asked to go further, a lot deeper, but then it's going to be a lot harder to capture. But so this is kind of the minimum set that we expect, and I think some training will definitely be required.